Are traditional Catholics too hard on John Paul II? Was he really Saint John Paul the Great? Well, let's discuss it. If you've spent time in traditional Catholic circles, you've probably heard a lot of criticisms of John Paul II. Many people call him Saint John Paul the Great. For a lot of people, this is very off-putting. They find the Latin Mass, they find the traditional prayers, they find everything that they love aesthetically and theologically. But then they get to this point where they start studying, for example, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. They start studying the suppression of the Latin Mass. They start studying the types of cardinals and bishops that were exalted or kept in posts under John Paul II. They start looking into some of the more controversial aspects of things like theology of the body and so on and so forth. And they get to this crossroads where they really have to make a decision. Are they going to continue with this childhood, understandable affection for John Paul II, who was the Pope of their childhood, was the very conservative Pope in a church full of leftist, actors and so forth? But when they kind of actually do the research and they do a deep dive into all of these sort of traditional apologetics, they realize that when the rubber meets the road, there are reasons to kind of scratch their head about John Paul II. In addition, he's declared a saint, and we're told that canonizations are infallible. Canonizations are not actually infallible necessarily in all cases. That's not my opinion. I'll link in the description an article from esteemed scholar Dr. Kwasniewski and another podcast from a priest in Italy talking about why that's not necessarily the case, that canonizations are infallible the way they're done now. That doesn't mean that if someone is canonized and it's not infallible, that means they're not in heaven. That's not what it means. But for the traditional sense of what a canonization is, it's very different now, and it has been for about 30 years or so, which has made it kind of more difficult to basically know for sure if somebody really deserves to be called saint, especially Saint the Great, like John Paul II. In this short video here, I'm not going to criticize John Paul II's theology. I'm not going to talk about, what my opinion about World Youth Day or any of these things that are very important to people. But I just want to bring a couple things up. Forget about John Paul II for just a second here. Think about, for example, if you worked for an organization that made widgets. You worked for the, widget company of America. And there was a time when your company was doing really, really well. And then, sadly, there was sort of a change up in the company, a big kind of revolution. They had a major board meeting and they decided they were going to do things in a different way and reach their clients in a different way. And everyone thought that it was going to be this wonderful thing. And anyone who was a naysayer was kind of seen as a really negative Nancy. And, this is the spirit of the way we're running the company now. This is the new way we're running the company. And maybe people that actually spoke up about how the company shouldn't be going the new way were even fired or suspended or demoted or something. Everyone thought, no, the company is going in a good direction. And in comes a new CEO. And this CEO is going to replace the old one who sort of saw the change happen. And everyone said, this man is going to turn this company around. Sure, we had those few weird years after that big board meeting, after that big conference, and maybe it wasn't a new springtime in the company, but this man is for sure going to turn this place around. Well, you give him 20 years to run the company. He has some bright spots. People love him. He's really intelligent. He's really personable. He knows everybody's name. He is like the greatest person, man to man, that everyone loves, that sort of thing. But when he ends up retiring, the company is worse for the wear. And sadly, many of the people that he promoted into high positions end up being some of the most destructive actors in the company years later as it continues to decline. You can probably tell with this analogy. This is an analogy or metaphor in business about the pontificate of John Paul II. Regardless of his great theological ideas that are important to people, regardless of his acumen as a philosopher, regardless of all the great things that people attest to. They went to World Youth Day and they saw John Paul II, and wow, it really meant something to them. Or you have these stories about, I remember hearing one story about a homeless man, or it was a priest who became a homeless man. And John Paul II basically turned his life around. And it was an incredible story. I mean, it really was like a tearjerker. I mean, thanks be to God for someone doing that. It's great. But the church continued to decline aggressively under his leadership. Literal Freemasons continued in their roles, we now know from revelations from priests like Father Charles Murr, under John Paul II, even though they were warned. He made Pope Francis a cardinal. The church continued to be destroyed from within under the leadership of John Paul II. Yes, it may be the case that he was a great theologian, if that's what you believe. It may be the case that he was a great parish priest. It may be the case that he was even a mystic. I don't know. But it's a totally other thing to say he was a great pope. Because when he was in charge, things didn't get any better. Now, I know the one counter argument to that will be they would have been so much worse if it wasn't for him. The thing is, that's a very convenient argument because there's really no way to test it, is there? That's like saying if the government doesn't employ a bunch of different restrictions, then we would all get really sick and die. We've seen that before, and it's not really a strong argument because we can't actually see it play out because we only have the one example. So anyway, I understand that John Paul II is super meaningful to a lot of people. And truth be told, before I really started doing my research, there was especially in a sea of very liberal Catholicism, you could point to his writings on pro-life and civilization, anti-communism, those sorts of things. You go, wow, this is a really great resource. But when you take a look at what has happened and the mess that we're in today, he was in charge of that mess for like 20 years or 24 years or whatever it was. Maybe my math is wrong there. And it just didn't get any better. And in fact, in many ways, it got a lot worse. Let me know if that upsets you in the comments. I don't mean this to be combative. I just kind of mean it as food for thought. So this has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.